The Devil's Well, the true story of America's deadliest spring. The water in Devil's Well is so clear you can see straight down to the bottom, 70 feet below the surface. Crystal clear, perfectly transparent, beautiful in a way that makes you want to dive in, to feel that cold spring water against your skin on a hot Arkansas summer day. 43 people have drowned in Devil's Well since 1865. The latest was just 3 years ago. A 24-year-old man named Michael Chen, an experienced diver with over 300 logged dives, who went into the water at 2:17 p.m. on June 14, 2021, and never came back up. His body is still down there. This is the story of Devil's Well, a natural spring in the Ozark Mountains of Arkansas that has killed more people than any other body of fresh water in North America. A place where the water is so pure it looks like air, where the geology defies explanation, and where something, whether you call it physics, fate, or something darker, pulls people down and doesn't let them go. The spring that would become known as Devil's Well was formed somewhere between 300 and 400 million years ago, during the Mississippian period when the Ozark Mountains were still underwater. Limestone deposits accumulated over millennia, creating the porous karst topography that characterizes the region, a landscape riddled with caves, sinkholes, and underground rivers. Devil's Well is technically a sinkhole spring, formed when the roof of an underground cave system collapsed, exposing the water table beneath. The opening is roughly circular, about 30 feet in diameter at the surface, widening to nearly 60 feet at the bottom. The water is fed by an underground aquifer, constantly flowing, constantly refreshing, always the same temperature, 58 degrees Fahrenheit, winter and summer. The Native Americans who lived in the area, primarily Osage and Quapaw tribes, avoided the spring. They had stories about it passed down through generations. The water was cursed, they said, not by spirits or gods but by the earth itself. The spring was a mouth. It swallowed things. They called it different names in different languages, but they all translated roughly the same: the hungry water, the eating place, the hole that doesn't give back. White settlers arrived in the Arkansas Ozarks in the early 1800s. They ignored the native warnings. They renamed the spring Devil's Well, partly because of the stories, partly because on certain days when the light hit it right, the water looked black at the bottom, like it went down forever. The first recorded death was in 1865. A farmer named Josiah Blackwell, 43 years old, father of 6. He went to the well to collect water for his cattle during a drought. His body was found 3 days later, floating face down in the center of the spring. Nobody thought much of it. People drowned sometimes. Accidents happened. The second death was in 1871, a 14-year-old boy who'd gone swimming. The third was in 1879, a woman collecting water who slipped and fell in. By 1900, 7 people had drowned in Devil's Well. Local residents started to notice a pattern. Not a supernatural pattern, nothing so dramatic. Just a simple, troubling fact. People who went into Devil's Well tended not to come out. In 1903, the Arkansas state government commissioned a geological survey of the spring, trying to understand why it was so dangerous. The surveyors spent 3 weeks studying the well, measuring depths, testing water flow, analyzing the geology. Their report, filed in July 1903, concluded that Devil's Well was a natural spring of unusual clarity and depth, fed by underground aquifer, presenting no obvious geological hazards beyond those common to any body of water. In other words, nothing special, just a spring. But the report also included an addendum, a handwritten note from the lead surveyor, a man named Dr. Edmund Harding. It read, "I must note, for the record, an observation that troubles me. During our surveys, we repeatedly attempted to measure the exact depth of the spring using weighted lines. Our measurements were inconsistent, varying by as much as 15 feet between successive attempts. We would measure 70 feet 1 hour, 85 feet the next, 68 feet an hour after that. My colleagues attributed this to operator error or current fluctuations, but I am not convinced. I have worked with water systems for 20 years and have never encountered such variability in a static spring. There is something irregular about Devil's Well that I cannot explain scientifically and therefore cannot include in the official findings. But I will state plainly, I would not enter this water, and I would not allow my children near it. Dr. Harding's note was ignored. The official report concluded there was no danger. Devil's Well was just a spring. By 1950, 23 people had drowned there. Thomas Whitaker was the first person to systematically study Devil's Well. He was a hydrogeologist from the University of Arkansas, fascinated by the Ozark's karst systems. In 1967, he began a 5-year research project examining the spring's geology, water chemistry, and flow patterns. What he found disturbed him. First, there was the clarity issue. Water clarity is determined by dissolved particles, minerals, organic matter. Normal spring water in the Ozarks has a visibility of 10 to 20 feet. Devil's Well had visibility exceeding 70 feet. You could see the bottom from the surface as if you were looking through air. This kind of clarity suggested the water was essentially distilled, stripped of all particulates and minerals. But that didn't make sense. The spring was fed by an aquifer flowing through limestone. The water should be rich in calcium carbonate and other dissolved minerals. Whitaker tested the water chemistry. The results were impossible. The water from Devil's Well had a mineral content of nearly zero. Pure H2O as close to distilled water as occurs in nature. It shouldn't exist in a limestone aquifer, but it did. Second, there was the depth problem. Whitaker used modern sonar equipment to measure the spring's depth. He got the same inconsistent results as Dr. Harding had in 1903. The measurements varied wildly, sometimes 70 feet, sometimes 90 feet, once as deep as 110 feet. He initially assumed equipment malfunction, but he tried multiple sonar units, all calibrated, all producing different readings. And stranger still, the variations weren't random. The spring seemed to be deeper in the afternoon than in the morning, deeper on certain days of the month, as if the bottom was moving. Third, there was the current. Devil's Well had no visible inlet or outlet. The water appeared to be still, a perfect pool. But when Whitaker introduced dye tracers, he discovered complex underwater currents, swirling patterns that pulled objects toward the center and down. These currents were weak near the surface, barely detectable, but they increased with depth, becoming stronger the farther down you went. At 60 feet, the current was strong enough to pull a weighted object sideways. At 70 feet, it was powerful enough to overcome a swimmer's efforts to ascend. This explained the drownings, Whitaker thought. People would dive down, exploring, not feeling any resistance. But when they tried to come back up, they'd be fighting against a current that got exponentially stronger as they descended. They'd exhaust themselves trying to swim up, panic, drown. It was a death trap disguised as a swimming hole. Whitaker published his findings in 1972. He recommended that Devil's Well be fenced off, declared a hazard, closed to the public. The state of Arkansas considered it. They held hearings. Local residents protested. Devil's Well was a landmark, a swimming spot, part of local culture. You couldn't just close it because some people had drowned. People drowned in lakes and rivers too. Were they going to fence off every body of water in Arkansas? The state compromised. They put up warning signs. Danger, deep water, strong currents, swim at your own risk. The drownings continued. In 1985, a group of experienced cave divers decided to explore Devil's Well properly. They wanted to map the underwater cave system, to understand the geology that created this strange spring. The team was led by Richard Stanton, a British cave diver who'd explored some of the deepest underwater caves in the world. If anyone could safely navigate Devil's Well, it was Stanton's team. They went in on September 3, 1985. 3 divers, Stanton, an American diver named James Peterson, and a French diver named Marie Duclos. They had full scuba equipment, redundant air supplies, safety lines connecting them to the surface. They descended together, following the wall of the spring down. At 40 feet, they encountered the first anomaly. The wall, which had been smooth limestone from the surface to 40 feet, suddenly changed. Below 40 feet, the limestone was covered in a thick, slick biofilm. Green-black in color, slimy. It coated everything. This was unusual. Biofilms typically form in nutrient-rich water with lots of organic matter. Devil's Well's water was essentially sterile. There shouldn't be any significant biological growth. But there it was, thick enough that when Peterson touched it, his gloved hand sank into it. He pulled back, disturbed. They continued descending. At 60 feet, they found the cave entrance. It was a horizontal fissure in the wall, about 6 feet tall and 15 feet wide. Water was flowing out of it. Stanton could feel the current. This was the source of the spring. The 3 divers hovered at the entrance, shining their lights into the cave. The passage extended beyond the range of their lights, disappearing into darkness. According to Stanton's later testimony, he felt an overwhelming urge not to enter. Not fear, exactly. More like a profound sense that the cave didn't want them there. He'd explored hundreds of underwater caves and had never felt anything like it. But they'd come to map the cave, so they went in. The passage was narrow, forcing them to swim single file. Stanton went first, Peterson second, Duclos third. Their safety line played out behind them, connecting them to the surface team. They swam for approximately 3 minutes, covering maybe 200 feet. The passage twisted and turned but didn't branch. Then, suddenly, it opened into a large chamber. Stanton's lights couldn't find the walls. The chamber was huge, at least 100 feet across, maybe more. And the current was stronger here, much stronger. He could feel it pulling him forward, toward the center of the chamber. He signaled to Peterson and Duclos to stop, to hold position. They did, gripping the rocky floor to avoid being pulled forward. Stanton shone his light down. The chamber floor dropped away into darkness. He couldn't see the bottom. He consulted his depth gauge, 78 feet. Then he looked up, shining his light toward what should have been the chamber ceiling. There was no ceiling. The chamber extended upward as well as downward, rising into darkness above him. He was suspended in the middle of a vast underwater void, unable to see the boundaries in any direction. This was wrong, geologically wrong. They were only 60 feet below the surface of Devil's Well. If the chamber extended upward, it should have broken through to the surface. But it didn't. Devil's Well's surface was small, 30 feet across. This chamber was massive. Stanton made a decision: abort the dive. This didn't make sense. Something was wrong with his instruments or with his perception or with something. They needed to get out. He signaled to Peterson and Duclos to retreat. They began swimming back toward the entrance. But the current was stronger now, noticeably stronger. Stanton had to pull himself along the rocks, hand over hand, fighting the flow. Behind him, Peterson was struggling. Duclos was falling behind. Stanton reached the passage entrance and turned to check on his team. Peterson was 10 feet behind him, still swimming forward but making little progress. Duclos was 20 feet back, clearly panicking, swimming hard but barely moving. The current was pulling them back into the chamber. Stanton swam back into the current, reached Peterson, grabbed his arm. Together they pulled forward, making it to the passage entrance. But Duclos was 30 feet back now, 40 feet, being pulled into the center of the chamber despite swimming with everything she had. Her safety line was still attached to the surface. Stanton grabbed the line and pulled, trying to haul her back. The line went taut, then tighter, then it snapped. Duclos disappeared into the darkness of the chamber. Stanton and Peterson made it back to the surface. A rescue team went down immediately, but they couldn't find the chamber. They found the passage entrance at 60 feet, entered the tunnel, but it dead-ended after 50 feet. There was no large chamber. The passage just ended in a collapse. Marie Duclos's body was never recovered. The official investigation concluded that the divers had become disoriented in the cave system, that Duclos had swum into a dead-end passage and become trapped. Stanton's account of the massive chamber was attributed to nitrogen narcosis, a state of altered consciousness that can affect divers at depth. But Stanton insisted, then and for the rest of his life, the chamber was real. The current was real, and whatever is down there in Devil's Well pulled Marie Duclos in and kept her. After the Duclos incident, serious diving expeditions to Devil's Well stopped. Too dangerous, too many unanswered questions, too many deaths. But recreational swimmers still came. The warning signs weren't enough to keep people away. On hot summer days, teenagers would climb the fence, jump into that crystal-clear water, swim and dive and play. Most of them were fine. They'd swim for an hour, climb out, go home, no problems. But every few years, someone would go down and not come back up. In 1991, a 16-year-old girl. In 1998, a college student. In 2004, a tourist from California. In 2011, a local man who'd been swimming in Devil's Well his entire life. The pattern was always the same. The person would dive down, usually to show off, to see how deep they could go. They'd descend to 40 feet, 50 feet, 60 feet, and then they wouldn't come back up. Their bodies would usually be found within a few days, floating in the center of the spring. Sometimes they'd be recovered quickly. Sometimes it took weeks. And sometimes, in 7 cases, the bodies were never found at all. They went into Devil's Well and disappeared completely. By 2020, the death toll was 42. Devil's Well had the highest drowning rate of any natural body of water in the United States. The state of Arkansas finally took action. In January 2021, they announced that Devil's Well would be permanently closed to public access. A proper fence would be installed, not just warning signs, but an actual barrier that couldn't be easily bypassed. The spring would be monitored. Trespassers would be prosecuted. The fence was completed in May 2021. For the first time in over 150 years, Devil's Well was inaccessible to the public. Then on June 14, 2021, Michael Chen went into the water. Michael Chen was a professional dive instructor from Seattle. He'd heard about Devil's Well and was fascinated by the stories, by the geology, by the mystery. He wanted to understand why this place killed so many people. He believed the deaths could be explained scientifically. The unusual currents, the depth variations, the clarity, these were geological phenomena, not supernatural events. With proper equipment and training, Devil's Well could be explored safely. On June 13, 2021, Chen cut through the newly installed fence. He had full technical diving equipment, rebreather system, multiple gas tanks, dive computer, underwater lights, helmet, camera. He was going to document the dive to prove that Devil's Well was explainable. He entered the water at 2:17 p.m. on June 14th. His helmet camera was recording. The footage was recovered 2 weeks later when his body was found. It's been studied extensively by diving experts, geologists, and law enforcement. What it shows is impossible to explain. The video starts normally. Chen enters the water, descends smoothly. The clarity is remarkable. The camera can see all the way to the bottom, 70 feet down. Chen narrates as he descends, noting his depth, his gas levels, the water temperature. At 40 feet, he reaches the biofilm layer. He touches it, comments that it's unusually thick for such sterile water. He continues descending. At 60 feet, he finds the cave entrance. The same entrance Stanton described in 1985. Chen pauses, shines his light into the passage. He can see it extends inward, beyond the range of his light. He decides to enter. Following the cave, he says to the camera, visibility is perfect, no sign of current yet. He swims into the passage. The walls are narrow just as Stanton described. Chen's breathing is calm, steady. He's experienced, not worried. After approximately 3 minutes, he enters the chamber. And this is where the video becomes disturbing. Chen's lights illuminate a vast space. The chamber is enormous just as Stanton described, but the walls are moving. Not flowing like water, not shifting like sediment, moving, pulsing, like the walls are breathing. Chen's breathing accelerates. That's not possible, he says. The walls are there. He doesn't finish the sentence. The current hits him. Chen is pulled forward toward the center of the chamber. He fights it. Swimming hard, but he's dragged forward anyway. His lights swing wildly, catching glimpses of the chamber walls, the floor, the void above. The current is too strong, Chen gasps. I can't, I'm being pulled. He deploys a safety buoy trying to ascend. The buoy shoots upward, but it doesn't surface. On the video, you can see it rising, then hitting something, a ceiling that shouldn't be there. The buoy bounces off and falls back down. Chen is pulled deeper into the chamber. His depth gauge shows 85 feet, 90 feet, 100 feet. This is impossible. Devil's Well is only 70 feet deep at its deepest point. The spring's surface is right there, 60 feet above the cave entrance. Chen should be ascending toward the surface, not descending deeper into the earth. But the depth gauge keeps climbing, 110 feet, 120 feet. Chen's breathing is ragged now, panicked. He's trying to swim up, but he's being pulled down into the center of the chamber. At 135 feet, the camera catches something in its light, something at the bottom of the chamber. It's hard to describe what it looks like. The image is blurry, distant, but it appears to be a hole, not a cave entrance. A hole, a void, darker than the surrounding darkness, and it's pulling water into it, creating the current that's dragging Chen down. Chen sees it. Oh God, he whispers. Oh God, there's. The depth gauge shows 150 feet. Chen's hand reaches toward the camera like he's trying to turn it off. The image lurches, spins. Then the video cuts to black. When the camera is recovered 2 weeks later, it has recorded 6 hours and 43 minutes of total darkness. No sound, no movement, just black. Then suddenly the image returns. The camera is rising, moving upward through the water. The chamber walls are visible again, receding as the camera ascends. The camera breaks the surface of Devil's Well. Sunlight, air, birds calling. The camera is still attached to Chen's helmet. Chen's body is floating face down in the center of the spring. He's been dead for 2 weeks. The autopsy shows he drowned, water in his lungs, cause of death, drowning. But his depth gauge, recovered with the body, shows a maximum depth of 378 feet. Devil's Well is 70 feet deep. After Michael Chen's death, the state of Arkansas sealed Devil's Well completely. Not just a fence. They filled in the opening with concrete and steel barriers. They covered it with dirt, planted grass over it. You can't even see where the spring used to be anymore. The official explanation for Chen's death is that he became disoriented in an underwater cave system. His equipment malfunctioned, and he drowned. The depth gauge reading of 378 feet is attributed to a malfunction caused by water pressure and equipment failure. The video footage is classified as part of an ongoing investigation and has not been publicly released, though portions have been viewed by experts who have signed non-disclosure agreements. Dr. Sarah Winters, a geologist from MIT who studied the footage, submitted a report to the Arkansas Department of Natural Resources in 2022. The report was marked confidential, but portions were leaked to the press. In it, Dr. Winters states, "The phenomenon captured in Mr. Chen's video cannot be explained by any currently understood geological or hydrological process. The chamber he entered should not exist at that depth. The vertical extension of the space defies the known topography of the area, and the object visible at 135 feet. I cannot classify what that object is. It does not correspond to any geological formation I have encountered in 30 years of studying cave systems. I am forced to conclude either that Mr. Chen's equipment was experiencing multiple simultaneous catastrophic failures, highly unlikely given the quality of his gear, or that Devil's Well contains geological features that challenge our current understanding of karst systems and underground hydrology. I recommend that the site remain sealed indefinitely, and that no further exploration be attempted until we can develop technology capable of safely documenting what exists beneath the spring." The report was ignored. Officially, Devil's Well is just a sealed sinkhole, nothing special, nothing dangerous anymore. But the locals in that part of Arkansas still tell stories. They say that on quiet nights, you can hear water moving beneath the concrete seal. They say the ground where Devil's Well used to be is always slightly warm, even in winter. They say that sometimes, if you stand on the spot where the spring's opening was, you can feel a pull, like something down there is still hungry. 43 people drowned in Devil's Well between 1865 and 2021. 7 bodies were never recovered. Michael Chen's was the last. But the spring is still down there beneath the concrete and dirt. The water is still flowing. The current is still pulling things toward the center, toward the chamber, toward whatever is at 378 feet. The Native Americans called it the hungry water. Maybe they understood something we don't. Maybe some wells don't just hold water. Maybe some wells hold doors, and maybe some doors are meant to stay closed. Devil's Well is closed now, sealed, safe. But the water is still down there, still clear, still perfect. Still waiting. 3 months after Devil's Well was sealed, something happened that nobody could have predicted. On September 18, 2021, a rancher named Douglas McAllister was drilling a new well on his property 7 miles east of where Devil's Well had been. He was drilling for livestock water, routine work. His drill hit water at 180 feet, which was normal for the area. But when he pulled up the first sample, the water was wrong. It was too clear, perfectly transparent, and cold, 58 degrees Fahrenheit, the exact temperature of Devil's Well. McAllister sent the sample to a lab for testing. The results came back 3 days later. The water had a mineral content of nearly 0, pure H2O identical to the water from Devil's Well. McAllister called the Arkansas Department of Natural Resources. They sent a team to investigate. They tested the new well, analyzed the water chemistry, studied the geological surveys of the area. Their conclusion was troubling. McAllister's well was connected to the same aquifer that fed Devil's Well. The underground water system was larger than anyone had realized, extending for miles beneath the Ozarks. And if that water could emerge 7 miles away, it could emerge anywhere. Within 2 weeks, the Department of Natural Resources had identified 17 other wells in a 50-mile radius that showed similar characteristics: unusual clarity, low mineral content, consistent temperature. All of them potentially connected to the same underground system. All of them potentially connected to whatever was at the bottom of Devil's Well. The state issued advisories to well owners in the region. They recommended testing water sources, installing filtration systems, monitoring for unusual phenomena. But they couldn't shut down 17 private wells. People needed water. So the wells stayed open, and people started reporting strange things. The first report came from a family in Hardy, Arkansas, 12 miles northeast of the sealed Devil's Well. The Johnsons, Mark, his wife Sarah, and their 2 children, had a well on their property that had been drilled in 2015. Good well, reliable water, no problems for 6 years. In October 2021, Mark Johnson noticed the water from his well tasted different. Not bad exactly, just different, cleaner, almost too clean, like it was missing something. He had the water tested, low mineral content, unusually pure. The lab technician mentioned it might be connected to the Devil's Well aquifer. "Should I be worried?" Mark asked. "It's just water," the technician said. "Pure water is actually better for you than mineral-heavy water. Nothing to worry about." Mark didn't worry. He kept using the well for drinking, cooking, bathing. The whole family used it. In November, Sarah Johnson started having dreams about water. Not nightmares exactly, just dreams where she was underwater, swimming down into darkness. She'd wake up gasping, sheets soaked with sweat. She mentioned it to Mark. He laughed it off. "It's probably stress," he said. "You've been worried about the well water." But Mark was having the same dreams. He didn't tell Sarah, didn't want to worry her. In December, their daughter Emma, age 9, started sleepwalking. She'd get out of bed in the middle of the night and walk to the bathroom. She'd stand at the sink, staring at the faucet, not turning it on, just staring. The first time it happened, Sarah found her and led her back to bed. Emma didn't remember it in the morning. It happened again 3 nights later, then 5 nights later, then every night. Always the same pattern. Emma would get up, walk to the bathroom, stand at the sink, stare at the faucet. If Sarah or Mark tried to wake her, she'd become agitated, distressed. It was easier to just let her stand there for a few minutes, then guide her back to bed. On December 18th, Mark woke up at 3 a.m. and found Emma standing at the sink as usual. But this time, the water was running. The faucet was on, water pouring into the basin. And Emma's hands were in the water. She was holding them under the stream, letting the water pour over her fingers. Mark approached carefully. "Emma, honey." Emma didn't respond. Her eyes were open but unfocused. She was staring at the water running over her hands. Mark reached for the faucet to turn it off. As soon as he touched the handle, Emma spoke. "It's calling," she said. Her voice was flat, emotionless. "It wants to come up." Mark turned off the water. Emma blinked, looked around, confused. "Dad, why am I in the bathroom?" She didn't remember saying anything, didn't remember the water. The next morning, Mark Johnson called a plumber and had the well sealed. They switched to municipal water, trucked in from a different county. The dreams stopped. Emma stopped sleepwalking. Mark never filed an official report. Didn't want people thinking his family was crazy. But he told his neighbors quietly. Told them to be careful with their wells. Some listened, most didn't. By March 2022, the Arkansas Department of Natural Resources had received 47 reports of unusual phenomena associated with wells potentially connected to the Devil's Well aquifer. Most were minor, strange dreams, feelings of unease, pets refusing to drink the water, easy to dismiss as coincidence or imagination. But some were harder to explain. In Ash Flat, a man reported that his well water had started making sounds at night, a low humming that seemed to come from the pipes themselves. He'd had plumbers inspect the system 3 times. They found nothing wrong. In Cherokee Village, a woman reported that her well water had developed a faint luminescence. If you looked at it in complete darkness, it glowed very slightly, like the hands of an old watch. Lab tests showed nothing unusual in the water composition. No phosphorescent bacteria, no radioactive elements, nothing that should make water glow, but it glowed anyway. In Evening Shade, a family reported that their dog had jumped into their well. The dog had never shown any interest in the well before. It was covered with a secure cap. But one morning they found the cap removed and the dog floating in the water, drowned. The cap was intact, unbroken. It had been unscrewed from the inside. The state sent investigators to examine the well. They found scratches on the inside of the cap, scratches that could have been made by a dog's claws, frantically trying to unscrew the cap from below the water line. The official report stated the dog must have somehow removed the cap and fallen in, but nobody could explain how a dog could unscrew a 30-pound metal cap that required significant force to remove. Dr. Patricia Mendez, a hydrologist assigned to investigate the wells, began to notice a pattern. The reports weren't random. They clustered around specific wells, wells that, when mapped, formed a rough circle around the location of Devil's Well. And the reports were increasing in frequency and severity. The closer the well was to Devil's Well itself. Dr. Mendez wrote a memo to the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality in April 2022. In it, she stated, "I believe we are observing a hydrological phenomenon related to the sealing of Devil's Well. By blocking the primary outlet of the aquifer system, we may have caused the water to seek alternative routes to the surface. The pressure in the system may be building, forcing water up through wells that were previously only tangentially connected to the main aquifer. However, this does not explain the behavioral reports, the dreams, the compulsions, the apparent attraction both humans and animals feel toward the water. These reports fall outside my area of expertise and may require investigation by psychologists or other specialists. I recommend immediate testing of all wells within a 20-mile radius of Devil's Well, and consideration of whether the spring should be reopened to relieve pressure in the system." The memo was marked under review and filed away. No action was taken. The situation escalated on May 7, 2022. A 15-year-old boy named Jason Reeves from Salem, Arkansas, was reported missing by his parents. He'd left home at 11 p.m., telling his parents he was going to a friend's house. He never arrived. His body was found 3 days later in an abandoned well on the outskirts of town, 12 miles from Devil's Well. The well had been capped and sealed for over 20 years. Nobody had any reason to go near it. Jason had somehow removed the cap, which required a wrench and considerable strength, climbed down into the well, and drowned in 4 feet of water at the bottom. The autopsy showed water in his lungs, but not just any water. The water matched the chemical signature of the Devil's Well aquifer, unusually pure, nearly zero mineral content. Jason's parents couldn't explain why he'd gone to the well. He'd never mentioned it before, didn't even know it existed. His friend, the one he'd supposedly been visiting, said Jason had never arrived, never called, never texted. Jason's phone was found in his pocket, water damaged but partially recoverable. The last thing in his search history from 10:47 p.m. on the night he disappeared was a Google Maps search for wells near me. He'd searched for wells. Then he'd left his house, walked a mile and a half in the dark, found an abandoned well, removed the cap, climbed down and drowned. Nobody could explain why. Jason's death made the local news. Other families in the area started coming forward with stories about their children. A mother in Melbourne reported that her daughter had been drawing pictures of wells obsessively for weeks, hundreds of pictures, all showing a circular hole with water at the bottom and something dark below the water. A father in Mountain View said his son had been collecting water in jars, storing them under his bed, 43 jars of clear water, all labeled with dates. A teacher in Horseshoe Bend reported that several of her students had mentioned the same recurring dream, swimming down through clear water toward a dark hole at the bottom. The pattern was undeniable. Something was happening to people who lived near wells connected to the Devil's Well aquifer, some kind of compulsion, some kind of call. Dr. Mendez pushed for a comprehensive investigation. She wanted to map all the connected wells, test all the water, interview all the affected families. She wanted to understand what was happening. The Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality formed a task force in June 2022. Dr. Mendez led it, along with a psychologist, Dr. Robert Chen, a neurologist, Dr. Sandra Williams, and a geologist, Dr. James Foster. They spent 3 months studying the phenomenon. They interviewed 67 families. They tested water from 43 wells. They analyzed medical records, sleep studies, brain scans. Their report, submitted in September 2022, was 23 pages long. The conclusions were disturbing. First, the water from wells connected to the Devil's Well aquifer showed no chemical or biological contaminants. It was safe to drink by every standard measure. Second, people who regularly consumed the water showed elevated activity in certain brain regions associated with spatial memory and navigation. It was as if their brains were constantly trying to locate something, to find a path to something. Third, the compulsions appeared strongest in children and adolescents, though adults were also affected. The compulsions increased with proximity to Devil's Well itself and with duration of water consumption. Fourth, the phenomenon appeared to be neurological, not psychological. Something in the water, or something about the water, was affecting brain chemistry in ways that couldn't be detected through conventional testing. The report's final recommendation was stark. All wells within a 20-mile radius of the former Devil's Well location should be sealed or disconnected from the main aquifer system. Residents should be provided with alternative water sources. Continued use of water from the Devil's Well aquifer system poses an unquantifiable risk to public health and safety. The state of Arkansas faced a dilemma. They couldn't shut down dozens of private wells without compensation. They couldn't provide alternative water sources to hundreds of families. The cost would be enormous, and the phenomenon, while disturbing, had only resulted in one confirmed death. They compromised. They issued advisories. They offered free water testing. They created an information hotline, but they didn't shut down the wells. And the incidents continued. In October 2022, a woman in Calico Rock reported that her well was making sounds, not humming like the earlier report, but something else. Something that almost sounded like words. She recorded it on her phone. The audio is difficult to make out, mostly just water flowing through pipes, but there are patterns in the sound, rhythmic variations. If you listen carefully with headphones in a quiet room, you can almost hear syllables. The recording was analyzed by an audio forensics expert, who concluded that the patterns were likely pareidolia, the human tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random noise. But the woman insisted it was real. "It's not random," she said. "It's calling, it wants to come up." The same phrase Emma Johnson had used while sleepwalking. "It wants to come up." In November 2022, a local news station in Mountain Home ran a story about the wells. They interviewed affected families, showed footage of the sealed Devil's Well location, discussed the task force findings. The story went viral online. Paranormal enthusiasts descended on the area. YouTube channels dedicated to unexplained phenomena sent investigators. A podcast called Dark Waters did a 5-episode series on Devil's Well and the connected aquifer. Most of these investigators were irresponsible. They trespassed on private property to examine wells. They collected water samples without permission. Some even attempted to locate and uncover Devil's Well itself, digging up the sealed location. The state had to increase security around the Devil's Well site, installing cameras and motion sensors to prevent people from disturbing the seal. But the attention had an unintended consequence. It made the phenomenon worse. Once people knew about the wells, once they understood there was something unusual happening, the reports increased dramatically. Power of suggestion, skeptics said. If you tell people their water is making them have strange dreams, they'll start having strange dreams. But that didn't explain the physical phenomena. The luminescence, the sounds in the pipes, the animals drowning themselves in wells. By December 2022, the Arkansas Department of Environmental Quality had received over 200 reports of unusual phenomena associated with wells in the region. And then the second death occurred. Rebecca Lindstrom was a 36-year-old schoolteacher from Cave City, 14 miles from Devil's Well. She lived alone in a small house with a private well that had been drilled in 2010. Her neighbors noticed she hadn't been to work in 3 days. They called the police to check on her. Officers found Rebecca's front door unlocked. The house appeared normal, no signs of struggle, no indication of violence. But Rebecca wasn't inside. They found her outside, behind the house at her well. The well cap had been removed. Rebecca was lying on the ground next to the opening, one arm extended down into the well shaft. She was dead. The autopsy was puzzling. Rebecca had died of dehydration and exposure. She'd been lying outside for approximately 72 hours, not moving her arm in the well until she died of thirst. But here's what made it impossible. The well shaft was only 8 inches wide. An adult arm couldn't fit into an 8-inch opening. It was physically impossible. Yet Rebecca's arm was inside the well. The paramedics who recovered her body had to extract her arm from the shaft. It was wedged in tightly, as if it had been forced. The medical examiner's report noted significant tissue compression and bone displacement consistent with extreme force applied to the arm. Rebecca's shoulder was dislocated. 2 bones in her forearm were fractured. Her hand showed signs of severe trauma. It was as if her arm had been forced down into an opening too small to accommodate it, with enough force to break bones and compress tissue. Nobody could explain how this happened, or why Rebecca would do it to herself. A search of her house revealed notebooks filled with writing, thousands of pages written in the weeks before her death, the same phrase over and over. I need to reach the bottom, I need to reach the bottom, I need to reach the bottom. On the last page, dated the day before she died, she'd written, "It's so close. If I can just reach a little further, it's waiting for me." After Rebecca Lindstrom's death, the Arkansas state government finally took decisive action. In January 2023, they announced the Devil's Well Aquifer Mitigation Program. The state would provide funding to seal or disconnect all wells within a 20-mile radius of Devil's Well that showed signs of connection to the main aquifer. Affected residents would receive compensation and assistance in obtaining alternative water sources. The program was expensive, estimated at $4.2 million, but necessary. 2 deaths were too many. By June 2023, 47 wells had been sealed. Water testing confirmed that these wells were no longer drawing from the Devil's Well aquifer. The reports of strange phenomena decreased dramatically. But they didn't stop entirely. Because sealing the wells didn't solve the fundamental problem, the water was still down there. The aquifer was still connected to Devil's Well, still flowing through miles of underground channels, still carrying whatever made it strange. And the water had to go somewhere. In July 2023, a sinkhole opened up in Evening Shade, 11 miles from Devil's Well. It appeared overnight, a circular hole 30 feet across, dropping straight down into darkness. State geologists examined the sinkhole. It was filled with water at the bottom, clear water, 58 degrees Fahrenheit, nearly zero mineral content. It was Devil's Well, or rather it was the same water, the same aquifer, emerging at a new location. They sealed it immediately, filled it with concrete, covered it over. 2 weeks later, another sinkhole opened in Cherokee Village. Same characteristics, same water. They sealed that one too. Then another in Ash Flat, another in Hardy, another in Calico Rock. The pattern was unmistakable. The water was forcing its way to the surface. Wherever they blocked one outlet, another would form. Dr. James Foster, the geologist from the original task force, published a paper in the Journal of Karst Geology in August 2023. His theory was disturbing. The Devil's Well aquifer system appears to be under increasing pressure from an unknown source deep underground. By sealing the primary outlet, Devil's Well itself, and numerous secondary outlets, private wells, we have created a closed system with nowhere for the water to go. The pressure is building, forcing the water to create new pathways to the surface through the formation of sinkholes. This is an unprecedented geological situation. Typically, blocking an aquifer outlet would simply reroute water to existing alternative channels. The fact that the system is creating new channels, forcing its way to the surface through solid limestone, suggests extreme pressure from below. I cannot identify the source of this pressure. There is no volcanic activity in the region, no tectonic movement that would explain it. The pressure appears to be coming from the aquifer itself, as if the water is being pushed from below by some force we cannot measure or detect. If this continues, we may face a situation where the entire region experiences widespread sinkhole formation, potentially threatening infrastructure, property, and lives. The state of Arkansas convened an emergency meeting of geologists, hydrologists, and engineers. The question, what do we do? Some argued for drilling relief wells, creating controlled outlets to reduce pressure. Others argued for attempting to block the aquifer system entirely at depth, cutting off the water source. Still others suggested the unthinkable, unsealing Devil's Well itself, reopening the primary outlet to allow the pressure to release naturally. The debate continued for months. Meanwhile, the sinkholes kept appearing. By December 2023, 18 new sinkholes had formed in a 30-mile radius around Devil's Well. Most were small, 10 to 20 feet across. A few were larger. All of them contained the same clear, cold water at the bottom. The state sealed them as fast as they appeared. Concrete, steel barriers, dirt fill. But it was like trying to plug a dam with your fingers. Every outlet they sealed seemed to cause two more to open somewhere else. And people were starting to avoid the region entirely. Property values plummeted. Families moved away. Schools closed. Businesses shut down. The area around Devil's Well was becoming a dead zone, not because of contamination, but because nobody wanted to live in a place where the ground could open up beneath them at any moment and swallow their house. In January 2024, the Arkansas State Legislature held hearings on the Devil's Well crisis. Residents testified, scientists presented data, engineers proposed solutions. The consensus was grim. There was no good solution. They could keep sealing sinkholes indefinitely, spending millions, watching the region die economically, or they could try something radical. On February 14, 2024, the state announced their decision. They would unseal Devil's Well. The plan was carefully engineered. They would remove the concrete and steel barriers gradually, allowing the water to equalize pressure slowly. They would install monitoring equipment, safety barriers, warning systems. Nobody would be allowed near the spring. The unsealing began on March 1, 2024. It took 3 weeks to remove all the barriers. The concrete had been poured thick, reinforced with steel. It took drilling, jackhammering, careful excavation. On March 22, 2024, they reached the original opening. The moment the final barrier was removed, water began flowing out of the opening. Not a trickle, a flood. Water poured out of Devil's Well like it had been under immense pressure, waiting to be released. The flow continued for 43 hours straight. Millions of gallons of water, flooding the surrounding area, creating a temporary lake before finally slowing to a normal spring flow. When the water stabilized, Devil's Well looked almost exactly as it had before being sealed. A circular opening, 30 feet across, filled with crystal clear water. 70 feet deep by all measurements. But something was different. The water was warmer, not 58 degrees anymore, but 64 degrees. Still cool, but noticeably warmer than it had been. And the sinkholes stopped forming. Within 2 weeks of Devil's Well being reopened, no new sinkholes appeared. The pressure in the system had been released. The aquifer was stable again. Dr. Foster's theory appeared to be correct. Sealing the spring had created a pressure buildup that forced the water to find new outlets. Reopening it had restored equilibrium. The state installed a permanent fence around Devil's Well, a serious fence this time, 12 feet high, topped with barbed wire monitored by cameras. Warning signs in multiple languages. No swimming, no diving, no trespassing. Violators will be prosecuted. But they didn't seal it again. They couldn't risk another pressure buildup. Devil's Well is open now. The water flows, the spring breathes. And the death stopped. It's been 9 months since Devil's Well was reopened. No drownings, no disappearances, no strange phenomena reported from nearby wells. The water testing shows normal mineral content now, not pure H2O anymore, but typical limestone-filtered spring water. Whatever made it unusual appears to have changed. Some scientists believe the pressure buildup altered the water chemistry temporarily, creating the unusual properties. Now that pressure has been released, the water is normal again. Others aren't so sure. Dr. Patricia Mendez, who led the original investigation, published a follow-up paper in November 2024. In it, she writes, "We still don't understand what happened. We know sealing Devil's Well created problems, and reopening it solved those problems. But we don't know why the water had such unusual properties. We don't know what caused the behavioral effects in people who consumed it. We don't know what the diving expeditions encountered in the underwater chambers, or whether those chambers still exist. What we do know is that Devil's Well has been stable for 9 months since reopening. The water appears normal. The sinkholes have stopped forming. Life in the region is returning to some semblance of normalcy. But I remain troubled by one fact. During the 43 hours that water poured out of Devil's Well after the unsealing, we calculated that approximately 8.6 million gallons of water were released. Yet the volume of the spring itself, based on our depth measurements and diameter, couldn't contain more than 50,000 gallons. Where did 8.6 million gallons of water come from? Where was it stored? And what was creating the pressure that held it there? I don't have answers to these questions. I'm not sure anyone does. But I know this. Whatever Devil's Well connects to, it's much larger than the 70-foot deep spring we can see from the surface. There's something down there, something we sealed away for 3 years, and now we've let it open again. I hope we made the right choice. Today, if you drive through the Arkansas Ozarks, you can find Devil's Well. The fence is visible from the road, though you can't see the spring itself. There's a small sign that reads, "Devil's Well Danger, No Trespassing VIOLATORS will be PROSSUTED." Local kids still tell stories about it, the haunted spring, the hungry water, the place that ate 43 people. But nobody goes near it anymore. The fence is too serious. The cameras are too watchful, and after everything that happened, even the teenagers who used to climb fences and ignore warnings stay away. Because everyone in that part of Arkansas understands now, Devil's Well isn't just a spring. It's a connection to something deeper, something we don't understand. And maybe some connections are meant to stay open. Maybe sealing them causes more problems than it solves. Or maybe we just got lucky. Maybe the pressure released at exactly the right time before something worse happened, before the ground opened up completely, before whatever is down there found another way up. Gary Mitchell is the ranger who monitors Devil's Well now. He checks the cameras daily, walks the perimeter weekly, makes sure the fence is secure, the warning signs are visible, the spring is undisturbed. I asked him if he's ever tempted to look into the water, to see what it looks like now, to check if it's really as clear as it used to be. No, he said immediately. I don't look. I walk up to the fence, check the equipment, walk away. I don't look into the water. Why not? He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, because I'm afraid if I look, I'll want to go in. And I know that if I go in, I won't come out. None of them did. The water in Devil's Well flows constantly, fed by an aquifer that extends for miles underground, connecting to sources we've never fully mapped, chambers we've never fully explored, depths we've never accurately measured. 43 people drowned there between 1865 and 2021. 7 bodies were never recovered. The Native Americans called it the hungry water. The water is still there, still flowing, still clear enough to see the bottom. Still waiting. And now, after everything, after the deaths, the investigations, the sealing, the sinkholes, the reopening, we watch it, we fence it, we warn people away. But we don't close it, we can't. Because we learned the hard way. Some doors, once opened, can't be closed without consequences. And maybe Devil's Well was always meant to be open. Maybe it's a release valve for something deeper. Maybe sealing it was the mistake, and everything that happened was the earth trying to tell us, this needs to breathe. Or maybe we're just lucky it didn't get worse. Gary Mitchell walks the perimeter every week, checks the fence, makes sure nobody's tried to climb over. And at night, he says, if you're very quiet, you can hear the water, not flowing, not dripping, but something else. It sounds like breathing, he told me, like the well is breathing, in and out, slow and steady, like something alive. I asked if that scares him. Every day, he said, every single day. But he keeps watching, because someone has to. Because Devil's Well is open now, and it needs to stay open. Even if we don't fully understand why. Even if the water is still hungry. Even if something down there is still waiting.